Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Jacob Horine, and I'm the artist behind PopFlyPopShop.com. And I'm here to do something that I've never done before. What I do every week is I do a weekly art print that's available for 1 week, baseball-themed comic book style covers, and I release them for 1 week and then retired forever. In the past, I have shown my illustration process, but I've never gone through the whole process from beginning to end. And so I'm going to share some of my thought process in creating this release. And not only the thought process, but just the actual process of making it from start to finish in the computer. So let's get started. So this is release number 68, the Yips. It's not a player, not a team, not an era, but an idea. The Yips is something that I think was created by a golfer. The Yips weren't created by a golfer, but the term the Yips was coined by a golfer to describe kind of inexplicably an athlete can't do the basic movements or motions that they're used to. Maybe a golfer can't do a simple 3-foot putt, or a pitcher is struggling just doing a routine throw from the mound to first base. So that's what the Yips are. And the idea to do a piece about the Yips came from someone in the Popfly collecting community. They said, why don't you do a player who struggled with the Yips? And there are players who are known, unfortunately, for having the Yips. Sometimes they get over them. Sometimes they've been career-ending. But what was really inspiring to me was just looking at the Yips as a thing. Like, what are the Yips? It's a mental block. It's a physical block. Maybe it's a mixture of both. But it's something that limits the player from doing these routine things. And thinking in terms of comic books and the comic book style storytelling, looking at the origin story, if you will, or the real meaning of what's behind this thing, the Yips, this mysterious thing. And even some of the words in some of the articles about the Yips are, is it real or just part of sports mythology? The Yips, do they really exist? So it's already in some of the language that is used around the term. Some of the language has that bigger than baseball, more than baseball. Even just using the term mythology in sports and regular sports article, that really lends itself to go a long way in a hyperbolic, we can do anything type of comic book storytelling. So to me, I want to explore what are the Yips, or what could the Yips be, and I just immediately thought, oh, this would be a great horror comic. We can see what the Yips are and how they are affecting a player. I decided not to go with a singular player because that's not the point. The point here is what the Yips are, not who they're afflicting. And that's the story that I wanted to tell. It would be a much different story if I focused on any player, and it would just take a different tone. As just for anyone who's watching these pieces, it takes a different tone if I single out a player for having a career-ending season of the Yips, or career-defining Yips. So I really wanted to focus on just the Yips. What are they? What are they doing? And I always like to think about in my projects is, if someone has no context of baseball and they hear a term or a phrase, what could that trigger? And that's how I got to the Dead Ball era, which is a release I had done. That's sort of what's behind Codebreaker as well, and some other pieces that I had done. If someone has absolutely no context, where would their mind go if they heard, oh, the player has the Yips? So let's get started in some of the stuff that we can actually see. So Again, here is the final product. Here's where I ended up. And here is how I got there. So some of the very early sketches that I did, this is obviously just a simple sketch. I did a kind of entity swirling around a player and that's making the player actually stumble. And I abandoned this idea really quick because if you're looking at someone who has the yips or struggling with the yips, everything looks the same about them. They look like they're having a normal day on the ball field, but they can't get the ball to first base or back to the pitcher or whatever. So they're not stumbling around like this. So I ditched that idea pretty quickly. And I went to a more classic pose, looking at what the yips could be. Maybe they're more beast-like or Muppet-looking like. I settled on the idea of having sort of a swarm around the player. So there's no reference material for that. So I went to a program that I use often and a program that I love called JustSketch.me. It's a website and an app that gives you these 3D models that you can pose as you'd like. Every one of those little dots that you see there is an articulation point. So I did these 4 figures here, one athlete and 3 other entities, and I molded them around this player. I didn't record the process of me posing these, but you get the idea here. Every one of those dots, like I mentioned, is a point that is able to be moved. So I wanted to gather these entities around this player as if they were able to manipulate him. And they've got most of their hands are around his arm, kind of affecting how he's throwing. But also there is one hand that's got his hand over his skull, because the yips can also be a mental issue, not a mental issue, but a mental aspect. They have a mental aspect to them, be it anxiety or fear, or fright, or some other block that prevents them from doing these routine activities. So this sort of where the storytelling comes in that. So the hands on the arm and the hands also on the head. So once I got this to a spot that I liked, this pose, I brought it in to start the sketching. And I'm going to skip through this pretty quick, but usually when I use blue lines, I'm just getting an idea, a very loose idea of where I want things, what I want things to look like. And I'm just exploring what the yips might look like. And here you can see some horns and the hoods and some wings. I ultimately didn't want to go this direction. It started to look too demonic. I wasn't trying to tell a spiritual tale here, but a supernatural tale. I tried again with some beastly looking things, but they didn't have that ethereal, haunting like quality. So I went back to the hooded type creatures, and I ultimately decided to take off the hoods and the wings and keep it basic to the mysteriousness of these hooded figures with eyes peering out. So these are the yips. These are what I've determined what the yips look like. I was fully intending this to be my work that I would go with, but when I finished this piece, and you'll see this in a moment when I'm done here, when I finished this piece, I thought, this is not, them having legs doesn't really lend themselves to looking very ghost-like. You can almost see them as just beings on a field struggling with the player, and that just didn't tell the right story. So after I had, I'll skip on ahead here. After I had finished this, I realized that they had a weight to them that I did not want. I did not want them to feel like they were there. But there's also, I'm using black lines to create something transparent. So I went back to the drawing board and started over. The idea was the same. I slightly changed the pose. I moved the camera ever so lightly on the 3D model, and I got to work. And so you can see here now the legs are still there on the model, but instead I wanted to create them like hovering and not standing there in place, so that it was more obvious that they were some ethereal, haunting being that was basically ghosts, or ghost-like, I should say. So first comes the blue line. Like I mentioned, that's my loose sketch. I almost always start with a blue line, especially when it's something that I'm doing this sort of 3D reference for. I'm finding the clothes, I'm finding the volume, I'm finding the some of the specifics of the character in the scene. If you were to zoom in closer to get a better look, you'd see the messiest line is my blue line. That comes from my animation days. I used to work in an animation studio. The under sketches were in blue pencil because they did not Xerox clearly, and they would just basically disappear. And so that's a carryover that I brought to this process. And once I complete the blue sketch and get it to sort of generally where I want it, then I'll go over it with a red pencil. It's still rough, but I'm defining what my lines look like. I'm using a digital pencil, not an inking pen, but I'm finding what the final piece is going to be. And so when I actually get to the black line, I'm essentially following what I had done on the red line. Yes, there are more decisions made there, but I try my best to make the red line version of this as finished as I can, but still rough, so that I'm not tempted just to stop there. And that's part of the reason why I use red and the pencil versus an inking pen. And I'm talking all digitally here, but is to not get tempted to stop there. But anyway, back to the piece here. And here I am putting the glove on this guy, and with some of this the way I've inked these ghosts, you can now kind of see through them. If you look at his foot there in the background, you can see it behind the ghost that's to the left of him. So the line of the mound or the dirt, whatever you want to interpret that as, you can see them through the ghosts. And I was experimenting with what's going to go in the background, but I wanted to leave it as it was. So this is what I completed in the inking phase, and I was very happy with it. I thought it worked great. Again, I did not want to single out a team or a player, so it is blank there because I wanted the focus to be only on the idea itself, not any of the specifics. So here's the part that I've never shared before. Here's the actual layout process, and then taking this into to Illustrator and doing this. There's a want, I think, and I'll speak for myself and not throw any other artists under the bus, but there's a want for this to appear to look like magic. And the first ideas I come up with are the best ideas, and everything that I can think of is, that's exactly what needed to be done. There's so much exploration done here, and just figuring it out. And hands down, this part of the process is what takes the longest. This part of the process is what is most difficult. And so as you can see, I'm doing the very professional act here of going to my own website and picking out all the horror comics and placing it on there. just so I could see what this looks like in context with other prints that are like it. I know that there's some folks that just collect the horror stuff. So I want to make these pieces, I want it to work together, but I also want them to be different from each other. And what's on my mind now as I'm doing this is the fact that the green monster and what I'm working on now, they look similar. So I'm tinkering, if you can see here, I'm tinkering with the background, trying different things that I can differentiate it from the green monster piece. But ultimately, I'm going to honor the piece versus worrying about what it looking too much like something else. So I'm going to do my best, but I'm going to serve this piece. And if a yellow background with the red header and green yellow text made this thing, then that's what I would have done. But I'm trying here. I'm trying. And it's not only this, I also keep the previous print and previous prints in mind too. There are only so many colors. I use kind of period specific colors, and so my color palette is limited. So I have the same colors appearing week after week, but I want to make sure that this week's color palette doesn't look like the week before. And so I try to do some differentiation. Some people collect these every single week and they display them. And so I don't want their eye in their collection to just go to this one spot on the wall where these two things look alike. So it's a weekly consideration that I take, is just how it looks in context with everything else that I've released. And you can see here me again tinkering with the background. There's not a lot happening. There's actually nothing happening with the foreground with the illustration. It's me just kind of dialing it in and finding the words that I want to use. And this is incredibly difficult for me. And you'll notice too, at least on the dead ball and the green monster, there's that band of color on the top, and then there's that vertical type on the left. There is a comic company called EC Comics. They're known for doing horror comics, and so this is a throwback. That sort of style here is a throwback to the EC Comics look. And even the logo that I use for Popfly, maybe we'll zoom in on it in a second. But it's very reminiscent of the EC Comics. I did it to look like the EC Comics. There it is on the left. I'm tinkering it right there. So now I'm just wondering, what am I going to type here? The horror of every player. This is a terrifying issue. So this is truly a difficult thing to do, is to find what are the right words for this, and make it look comic book-esque, but try to tell a story with it. And what I really like here, especially in this case, is the word issue. And I'm going to use the word issue to my benefit here, because issue, of course, means issue of comic, but then there's the other definition of issue. It's like there's a thing that we're talking about, a thing that's either a problem or focus point. So it's a double play on words to say this is one terrifying issue. I don't think I ended up using this particular graphic here, but I'm certainly exploring with it. But I love these using common phrases, or just very, very matter of fact phrasing that works, and that word issue is perfect for that. So I think that's what I ended up there. If you can see it, if it goes back, this issue is out of control. And so it's a very matter-of-fact way of saying this issue is out of control. Like it's a control issue with the player getting the ball to the plate. So it's a play on words. There's another thing I thought of here. When they take control, you lose yours, and just adding to the horror of the Yips. When they take control, you lose your control. And it was this suggestion of one of my friends here that I was sharing my process with. It's like, why don't you add something to say that the stakes are high and there's pressure. So I think that's a great idea. So I made this got a speech bubble, announcer type speech bubble here, made to show that there's anxiety here. It's fear. There's worry on his face, and as it is at the bottom of the ninth, the bases are loaded and nobody is out. So stakes are high, the anxiety is higher. So I made this, but you'll see I'm gonna struggle with where to put it for a bit. I don't want to trample on the artwork, but I also want it to be there as well. So again, I reiterated this several times, but this is tricky. There is usually a lot going on in comic books, and it's number 68 because this is my 68th release, by the way. But there's a lot going on in comics. There's a lot of words and typography going on. So finding that balance of here's the artwork and managing its how busy or sparse it is. This is a fun little detail that I added here for the silhouette for the bottom left. Usually it's a barcode, but sometimes it's a silhouette. I thought this would just be a subtle little, well, maybe not so subtle, but a fun little element here, because the Yips are lack of control, not being able to hit their target. So I thought to do something alluding to that as well. Maybe it's something that you'll notice on a second look versus the first one. Still working on some text here. And you thinking about the words too. You might don't miss this issue, miss this. You don't want to miss. I kept chewing on those words as I was going, adding some anxiety lines here, some sweat popping off of his head, but again, another play on words, thinking about missing, because that's a player does not want to miss, and I thought that was a really a fun kind of tie-in, and you'll see that often. Don't miss this issue. And so I thought that would be a great addition for this piece here. And, I keep going back with the titling, as you can see. Not fully quite happy with where it is. I'm looking to balance everything here, adding those little worry lines. Spending a lot of time on the worry lines, apparently. Gotta get them just right. And so what I'm writing here is what eventually ended up on the release. This is a terrifying issue you don't want to miss. And I was really pleased with that phrasing, because I could see it being delivered very matter-of-factly, maybe from a coach saying, this is a terrifying issue you don't want to miss. And it's here, this double meaning is, yeah, you don't want to miss this issue, yes, but as a player, this is a terrifying issue and they don't want to miss their target. So I was really really happy with that word, the wording, and settled on this here, this sort of badge looking burst right there. And one thing too, the colors that I'm using here are not the colors that are going to be on the final issue. These are my general colors as I go. Once I take this into Photoshop, I actually pick the real colors that I'm using. I use the period appropriate halftone colors to make these. And so I'm not going to be able to get that exact green or teal or red, but this is my guide that I use to at least plot out what I'm going to do. And you'll see when I get to the finesse part of this that the colors do change, sometimes pretty dramatically. And it's often a pleasant surprise because of the limitations. It presents you with options that you normally wouldn't have done had there not been those limitations. And there needs to be creative ways to solve it. So that's what happened with this one. If you'll notice the color of the yips here, and you'll see how they change in the final product. And then this is something I'll often do. I'll make 2 copies on my artboard. I'm trying out ideas, but I don't want to lose my first one. I thought, well, maybe if I take out the left thing that says fear on it, it'll have a different effect. But ultimately, I went back to what I had originally planned. There's the EC Comics callback right there. Playing with the idea of having some sort of footer there. Still going back to that yellow bursty text there, getting it just right. All right, so now we are in Photoshop, and we are giving everything the comic book look and finding the colors that will eventually be our final colors. This process is usually pretty short, not a lot of time spent, because there is a pretty strong guide already. This one spent maybe a little bit more time than usual because of the fact that these are apparitions, and I want them to be ghoulish, but using the colors that I have and transparent-ish. So this one is a bit tricky. So no surprises here. Everything that's red is red. The dirt is orangish brown. Working on the flesh tone there. And so if you'll notice too as well, actually I'll say that at the end, but so now I've got all the colors dialed in. For the most part, I start to put an overlay on it to give it the texture and the age and the yellowing. But I'm still going through and messing with the colors, because once you add that yellowing of the paper, it affects the colors underneath. So even though I've got the age on top, I'm still going underneath and toying with the characters and doing this more drastic difference between the light green and the yellow green of the Yips characters. That was an accident, but I really liked how it turned out, and so I kept it. I didn't plan on having that much contrast between the kind of the inner color and the outer color. I really liked how it came out, so I stuck with it. Happy accidents, as Bob Ross would say. And at the last minute too, I had this idea to change those colors somewhat. I got some more textures here that I did not end up using, but and then you saw for a brief moment there some folded, there we go, some folded texture. That's some texture that I had made in Procreate, as well as some other textures that I already had, kind of combining them here and making this piece. And I am doing the aging on the edges and going in a little bit more than I had than I normally would, because keep in mind when these get printed, they get cut. So there is an 1/8 of an inch on each print that gets cut off. And so if I want that worn edge to be seen, I'll have to make it or reach out more so than that 1/8 of an inch that will get cut off. So this is me kind of painting in some of that texture there, or some of that wear and tear, I should say. And I'm pleased with also how the last minute color change I did of having that band at the top be blue. I felt it really helped this piece pop out on its own and also differentiate itself from the Green Monster print that it was closest to in terms of color. And thought it would be great to add a little bit of color in the inside of this text here. And the fonts are by a lovely company called Comic Craft. I believe Comic Craft, they have the fonts that made the main title, and the other text, like at the top, that says "This issue is out of control." That is from Kern Club, I believe. So most of these fonts are from these two companies, if not all of the fonts are from these two companies. But I love their fonts and highly recommend them to anyone who's doing this comic book work. There's a close-up of what you could see. You get a good glimpse of the halftone pattern there. And that is the end of that. And so this is the finished product, what it looks like, the Yips. It was a blast kind of going through this and detailing some of the details and talking through the process. And this was one of my favorite pop flies in terms of the experience of doing it. I gave it a little bit more time than I usually would, and that's just because I was having a lot of fun, and I'm very pleased with how it came out. So anyway, this is available for another 3 days, almost exactly 4 days, almost exactly at the time of this this broadcast. And if you miss it and get it later, secondary market, you can grab it. But check out popflypopchop.com for this week's release. And I really enjoyed talking about this and going through the whole process. And I was mentioning it in the beginning. There's a hope, I think, of every artist that you know, they're creative beings, and every choice they make is an artistic one and the right one. But there's some amount of vulnerability that I think is good for just us as people, to put yourself out there, and the process is ugly and meandering and confusing, and though I knew how I sort of wanted it to go, there was so much exploration between a vague idea and what ended up on the screen, and a lot of trying out things that didn't work. And happy to share that with you. And I would encourage you, in whatever your vocation is to be okay with version 1.0. Because I think my fear of being okay with 1.0 stopped a lot of pieces from continuing or to be shown or even started, because I wasn't happy with either an idea or the execution. But embracing version 1.0, 1.2, 1.5, all the way to your finished product, I think that's been a lovely gift of this whole project. And it's been new for me, being 42 years old and figuring this stuff out. But I'm glad for it. But anyway, thanks for coming along. Thanks for listening to me yap about the Yips. It's been a blast. Please follow me at Popfly Pop Shop on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, and go to popflypopshop.com for the weekly releases. And thank you again for joining me. And I hope we do one of these soon. And take care. Have a good one. Bye.